and welcome to another edition of RecruitMilitary Live, a continuing series of live broadcasts covering all things military transition, veteran employment, mil-spouse employment, and much more. My name is Lucas Connolly, retired U.S. Army officer and former TAP program manager, here to share with you the ins and outs of navigating the waters of a transition to civilian employment. If you're in search of meaningful employment, well, you're in the right place. Please visit rmvets.com/live to learn more. Okay, let's roll. Are you getting ready to transition out of the military? Is this experience leaving you feeling just a little stressed out? Maybe a whole lot of stressed out? Well, if you answered yes, then don't touch that mouse. You're in the right place. Today's topic is transition stress. Our guest today wouldn't give a bean to be a fancy pants Marine. She'd rather be a dog-faced soldier. She served in Operation Iraqi Freedom from 2009 to 2010 with the Army's own 3rd Infantry Division, the Rock of the Marne. Since leaving the service, she's earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and is now working on her PhD in psychology at the University of Buffalo. As a part of her doctoral research, she is conducting a multi-year study of the stress associated with transition from military service to civilian life. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Emily Knitter. Emily.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I thought you'd appreciate the a little nod to the Rock of the Marne.
Yeah, I'm going to be singing the Marne song for the rest of the day in my head, so thanks for that.
All right. Well, now that you know who we are, folks out there in streaming land, let's hear who you are. Hit us up in the chat window. Let us know where you're watching from, who you're with, who you served with, what your status is. Are you an active duty service member? Are you in transition? Are you a veteran or mil-spouse or a caregiver? Hit us up in the chat window. We want to know who you are. And if you've got questions, comments, or concerns, we'd like to hear that too. Thank you very much. All right, folks, we are Wheels Up. Emily, you're doing fantastic work. And when I first heard about the work you're doing, I knew I just had to have you on the show. Stress is most certainly, it's kind of like a silent enemy. It just sneaks up on you. When I was a TAP counselor, we would teach a class about the transition experience from kind of a holistic resiliency standpoint. And I would invariably ask the class, raise your hand if you're feeling stressed. And for some reason, only a couple of hands would go up here and there, 3 or 4. It was a pretty rare occasion that I got a lot of hands in the air. But almost 100% of the clients that sat in my office and had a personal consultation reported that they were either moderately or highly stressed out. Why do you think this is?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think part of it is, while we're active duty, no one is asking you, hey, do you feel stressed? And you're not supposed to volunteer and be like, hell yeah, I don't know what I'm doing right now. Like, we're taught to figure out problems on our own. We don't want others to know that we aren't confident, because that's the whole thing. Like, if you don't know the answer, go figure it out and come back and tell us. So stress and expressing that in a question like that, it's not normalized. And also we don't talk about the stress that goes into training and normal thing. Like, we know that we can get through hard stuff when we lean into it together. Otherwise, like, embrace the suck wouldn't be a saying. So, like, we know basic training sucks and is stressful. We know deployments suck and are stressful, but that's normalized as something that is stressful. And so we can kind of lean into, like, yeah, we're all feeling the same way. So, like, let's get through it together. Let's find the silver linings and let's make the best of it. But we don't have that same mentality when it comes to getting out of the military.
Yeah, we always talk about confidence, competence, and discipline. I mean, for some strange reason, we're even taught not to smile in pictures. I mean, go into any headquarters and look at those command photos, sergeant major, colonel, captains, first sergeant. They're all like this. Like being miserable is a requirement. And if you've got one fella there smiling in his picture, people make fun of him. Like, what's wrong with him? Why is he so happy?
Or you don't show the emotions, good or bad.
Yeah, you're supposed to be miserable, right? So stress doesn't just appear out of nowhere, right? There are actual causal factors here. There are contributing things that bring on that stress reaction. Can you talk for just a minute about the causal factors of stress?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, generally, the causal factors of stress, we're looking at can you meet your basic needs? Are you financially stable? Are you employed? Is your family life good? Those types of things that across the board contribute to how stressed or how comfortable you feel. Do you feel like you have meaning and purpose in what you do? That's a big thing, particularly for us in the military. Like, we're used to serving something bigger than ourselves.
Yes.
So I think that's a big thing when we get out, that you don't always necessarily have that same experience, but you know what that feels like. So if you go from like having this huge purpose in your life to working a job that you don't really feel committed to, that's stressful in and of itself. And another piece that I do a lot of research in with my work is there's the general stress factors, and then there's the factors that contribute specifically when you're getting out of the military.
Yes.
And kind of to run through them really quickly without digging into them is, one thing is we consider the military a family. So when you get out of the military, you're losing a loved one, and there are feelings of like grief that you need to experience as if you've ended a relationship or gone through a nasty divorce, depending on how you get out of the military.
Right.
You've got the loss of your identity as a service member. There's potentially, unfortunately for a lot of people, a new term that's coming up now is something called moral injury, where it's like, okay, did you have an expectation that either individuals in the military or the military in general was going to keep you safe, or something was going to happen, or something went against kind of your moral compass that you were asked to do? There's a lot of nuance with that one. But there's also, we are so conditioned in the military, something that I try to do is, even when we're talking about the transition, it's usually, we're going to transition to the civilian world. Like, it's the military to civilian transition. But the military purposefully creates an in-group where it's us kind of against the rest of the world. And we have to be that way. We have to be kind of stronger and better and more disciplined than those in the civilian world or whatnot. But psychologically, when you become part of an in-group, you have to have an out-group that you're comparing your worth against, that you need to feel like you're kind of doing better than. And that's like your marker for how you're doing. So we spend our whole time in the military judging ourselves against the civilians, when in actuality, like, we are still the same people. And when we get out, we're no longer away from, like, we're in that group now. And so there's a big challenge when we get out to figure out, like, okay, how do I fit into this? And how do I reconcile this as people that I do actually affiliate with? And I am a part of this group as well. So I try, going back when I have these conversations, to not say transitioning to the civilian world. I just try to say transitioning out of the uniform or something like that, so it doesn't perpetuate that divide. But then it's a lot of, figuring out, like, what's your identity? We're issued an identity really the day that you sign up. So it's like, once you take that uniform off, who the hell are you? Like, really? And it's cool because you have a lot of choice, but we're not used to really having that much choice. And also, our identity is not something that we have a class where it's like, hi, this is how you're going to think now. It's so submersive with everything we do that we're not really thinking about how much we're internalizing that. And then the final component that's really stressful, I think, kind of to go through them quickly, is we're very used to having structure and black and white goals and a mission, and like everything is very clear cut, where when you get out of the military, it is basically the exact opposite of that. So it's figuring out, like, okay, how do you just like determine and set that structure for yourself? And what does that look like? What are going to be your goals? Because the gloves are off and you can kind of do whatever the hell you want, frankly, which can be really overwhelming when you're used to being told what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, career progression in and of itself, if you happen to be a rifleman, it's very, very clearly, you can look at your sergeant major, you can look at your first sergeant, you can look at your commander and see the path to where that is. And if that's your goal, and somebody's basically told you that is your goal, just so you know, that's your goal. That's where you want to be. You want to be a team leader, then a squad leader, and then a platoon sergeant, and then you maybe spend some time in the heavy company, and then from there you want to go be a master sergeant or an ops sergeant, spend some time in the 3 shop, go to drill sergeant school, maybe spend some time in recruiting, and come back, get promoted. It's all very lockstep and it's prescribed. You get out into the civilian world, it's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you got? Yeah, you got to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, and you got to figure out how to get there. I mean, I think that that's why a lot of us tend to, for a number of reasons, drift towards, like military, or not military careers, but law enforcement careers and things like that, where there are kind of more of a clear cut
Feels familiar
of that accomplishment. Yeah, it does feel familiar, but there's a lot more opportunity out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said, and I love the analogy of losing a relationship, like a breakup, because I actually had one of my I said one of the best commanders I ever had years ago. He said to me one time, as we were talking about career progression, he said, just so you know, think about this, Luke, for a second. The last thing the Army is going to do at the very end, when your career comes in, and the last thing the Army is going to do is break your heart. You're either going to not get the promotion you want, you're not going to get the assignment you want, you're not going to get the report you want. Something else that you wanted out of the military is not going to come to you, and you're going to have to deal with that heartache. So, and so I completely appreciate that. Now, you're doing your doctoral work now down at the University of Buffalo, downstate from me. I don't know if all the snow has melted where you are, but I can actually see my grass now. So that's a positive.
It is sunny and 50. I'm so happy.
Oh yeah, and hopefully the bike is coming out of the garage today. So we'll see about that.
Tell
us a little bit about the work you're doing down there at UB.
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate in that I'm also partnered with a research group out of one of the VAs. Thanks to COVID, one of the greatest things is remote work is so normal now. So I'm actually partnering with a big group of researchers out of the Bronx VA, even though I'm 7 hours away in Buffalo. But the work that we've been doing, broadly, we are doing a combination of surveys. We sent one out online last year. We're doing some very long form interviews. We're doing some discussion roundtables, a lot of social media kind of chats, conversations that way, and really a huge, a holistic approach to try to build this conversation around transition stress from the grassroots level, but also adding to it from the academic research perspective. But my big passion with this is I want to build it from a foundational lived experience using veteran voices, ground up method. Because a lot of times with research, it's people in the ivory tower just kind of saying oh, I think this is what's going on. Let me research and figure out whether or not this is true. And so when I started in undergrad, reading research on veterans and transition felt like huge pieces of the conversation were missing, because it was people who hadn't actually served in the military, who hadn't had experiences really knowing what questions to ask. And so I think, I come in with a little bit of an advantage having served, but I also am trying my best to get as many voices as possible in there and building on the research as we go based on what feedback we're getting.
Great. Now we've got on hand here, we've got this handy dandy, and I love this graphic. And I wish I had seen something like this long before my transition. Can we pull that up and take a look at it? Because this really talks about, here we go. Thank you to my amazing social media manager, Sean. This is almost like the stages of dealing with grief. Or
totally.
Could you take us through this and just talk us through the fine points here? I think this is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So this graph, the first time I saw it when I was trying to figure out my own kind of transition experience, I was like, holy crap, they made a graph exactly for me. This is what I've gone through when I got out of the military. We get out the first couple months, everything's new, everything's exciting. The military has given you kind of enough little points where you feel like you've got a plan and you're going to be able to execute it and you're going to be great. So you're kind of coming out either on that excitement, that honeymoon period, everything's good. Or on the flip side of that, like you said, sometimes the military breaks your heart. You end up getting out for a reason that you didn't think you were going to, or you're getting out disappointed in your experience. So you might be in a sense of disbelief. You might have a little bit of numbness to the fact that you are no longer wearing that uniform. Then you might be in denial for a little bit of no, I'm going to we're going to figure this out. I'm going to get back in however that conversation goes in your head. But regardless of whether you get out on a high or you get out on a low, at some point, you're going to realize that actually this isn't going quite the way that you expected it to go. And so you're going to have this sense of uncertainty. You're going to start feeling a little unconfident in your abilities and what's going on because it's such a different world. And then, so then it kind of goes down. You've got some confusion. You're starting to feel pretty low. And then everyone that I've talked to, for the most part, you hit a crisis point, you know, and the analogy I use with people I've talked to is like, it feels like there's one day where you just fall off a cliff. And it's like, I was doing good. Shit. Like, I'm not, you know, like mine, I was sitting on my bed about 8 months after I got out of the military, bawling. And I called my dad and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing right now, but like, I need to do something different because like nothing is working right now. And then from here, you have options. You know, it's unfortunately after this point is what I would likely imagine is where we're seeing kind of some of our suicide rates, unfortunately. Because if it's you hit this point, you don't feel like there's anyone you can talk to, there's no resources you have, you feel completely alone, it might feel hopeless. And you might unfortunately make a decision that you can't come back from. Or there's people who, you know, we talk about this a lot where you just figured out just enough. Like, okay, I can skate by at this point. This is just what I can expect from now on. And you just kind of settle into this mediocre life of like, I'm going to drink, I'm going to sit here, you know, whatever the coping mechanisms are of just being like, this is what it is. Okay. And you can kind of figure out like, okay, I don't want to be here. How do I change things? You either get to the point where like, you're kind of coasting a little bit better than where you were at, but you're not. Or, you know, we talked about like, what is your mission and purpose? What is your values? What is the shit that you want to do with your life now that it's not all being issued to you, now that you're not wearing a uniform? And it's once you hit this point where it's like, okay, let me figure this out. Like, let's figure out where I want to take my life from here. And how do I create that roadmap now that we know that I'm not getting one from someone else to get to where I want to go? And that the fun part with this transition cycle, though, is this graph was actually made to discuss people who had received significant medical diagnoses. And this transition is the same, like you said, it looks like a grief timeline. It's the same for any major life transition. And that's the big thing that I like to talk about with military transition is, you know, we think if we're not figuring it all out and we're not able to execute right away and get it done, that we're doing something wrong. But really, this is so normal. And everybody goes through this experience, you know, and you wouldn't think if you lose a loved one that you're feeling depressed, that means you're failing. That's just part of the experience, you know? And so going through that experience of stress and depression and kind of uncertainty when you go to the military is also normal. And it doesn't mean that you're failing.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you from my experience, I hit that crisis point. I think my crisis point was like the day I realized I was retiring. I just had to, I literally like locked myself in my office and I just had to have a few moments. And then I'm pretty sure I put my deputy in charge and I took the rest of the day off because I was just kind of trying to absorb the reality that, you know, I thought my career was going unabated towards, you know, endless success. And I realized that I wasn't going to get to where I wanted to be, and that my retirement timeline was a lot shorter than it was going to be. Yeah, you break. I mean, you have some people, maybe it takes them several weeks to get to that point, but for me, it all happened all at once.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure I dropped my head on my desk, and the moment that you realize you've got to get in charge and you've got to get ahead of all this, and nobody else. Well, there's a lot of resources out there. I shouldn't say nobody else is going to help you. There are a ton of resources out there. You got to reach out for them, but there is a moment there.
Well, and I think,
feel helpless.
You know, I didn't reach out for help for a long time because I didn't know this was normal. And so I assumed I was the only one struggling. So like, why would anyone be able to help me if I'm the only one struggling? So therefore, it doesn't make any sense to reach out to anybody. You know, that was the logic in my brain when I was kind of in that darker place of like, oh, well, there's no point to reach out because no one's going to get what I'm going through. You know, and so I think having these conversations of how normal this is and the fact that there are resources, and also this isn't necessarily a one-time thing. You know, you can go through waves of this. You know, we talk to people all the time that still feel like they're transitioning years out. You know, there's no timeline either, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to talk for a second about attachment. And if we're done with this, let's go ahead and drop that. All right. So if my man behind the screen, thank you, Sean. If my man behind the screen, Sean, I don't get a chance to give Sean doesn't like to be on camera, but I like to point out Mr. Sean Simmons once in a while. He's the man at the controls, in the control booth, so to speak, doing great things for us here, making this show possible. I'm going to talk for a minute about attachment style. You know, you talked about culture. Now you get down to Fort Benning or Fort Bragg or some of the other homes of some truly exceptional, truly elite forces, and you definitely feel the culture all around you. There's nothing quite like being in a unit which is just top tier. Not that excellence doesn't occur at every level in every unit in the military, but there is definitely that culture when you get to an elite level, those high readiness requirement units in all the branches of the service. Now, you mentioned to me, and I've heard this now from two different folks now, the term attachment style. And this is a term that I'd not heard up until about a month ago. And someone told me that your attachment style as a direct reflection of how you manage the stress of transition or how you experience the stress of transition. Can you kind of explain that?
Sure. Yeah, it definitely seems that attachment style is kind of more of a hot button buzzword lately, which I'm all for. But one thing that my main research partner, Dr. Ashley Green, and I have really been looking into is two components to this conversation. One is, like you said, there is this culture, there is this vibe in the military of like, this is what we're doing. It's very cohesive. Everybody's on board and it's a family. So in a lot of ways, the way that we interact in a family environment, even from our childhood, is going to be mirrored in the military in some way or another, because it's also an all-inclusive unit. And so we come in with expectations of what the military is going to do for us. You know, why did we enlist? What are we hoping to get out of it? And it often mirrors or is the opposite of what our family was able to offer in childhood. So either we're joining to like get structure when we felt like there wasn't any structure, and we want something so that we know what does doing good look like. You know, I've heard that from a lot of veterans is when they grew up, they didn't know when they were doing well or when they weren't. And so the military is very attractive because it's like, okay, I know what the rules are and I can figure this out. And I'm really missing that.
Clear cut.
Yeah, exactly. Or we get people who maybe grew up in a military family. The military is this very big thing and they want to be a part of that legacy. And so they're going in to try to continue that whole thing. And so the issue with that, one of, kind of different components of this conversation is the military promotes what's called a disorganized attachment. So because we get the vibe that the military is a family and we all feel that way, we live on base, we eat and breathe around each other, like everything is right there. Right. But at the end of the day, the military is also a business and it's also an organization. Mm-hmm. And so, we talk about like promotions and how that works. It's all a meritocracy. So, the standards are the same across each branch, whatever, like how you need to get promoted, what you need to do to achieve is great. But although the standards are the same, ideally, they would be enforced the same and be completely consistent across everyone who's getting them. But we know in practice, there's still the human influence on that. So, whether or not how things are given out also play into, what base you're at, what unit, commander, supervisor, all that type of stuff. There's still a human influence over what is supposed to be a very black and white achievement standard. And there's also a limited number of promotions to go around, of assignments to get, all these types of things. And so because of this, we talk a lot about how like veterans feel like they're continually kind of comparing each other to everyone, because we're constantly competing with each other. And you're also always looking at yourself and kind of judging yourself. Okay, where am I standing next to these people? But another component of this, especially in the military, is we need to train to perfection, because anything less than perfection in theory could equal death. In combat, that's what you got to do. So like, you can't be a work in progress. Like you need to do it right, and you need to do it right every single time. And so, it's very normalized to kind of get called out for failures. Everybody knows who the Blue Falcon is of the unit. It's very public. And if you're not meeting the standards, it's not so much just like, okay, we'll do better. Let's work on this. You can get better at this. It's unacceptable. And the military will reward you as long as you're perfect and you're doing well. But the second, like you said, you do something wrong, and especially to a point where it's a significant failure, you're no longer like part of the club. It's like, okay, bye. Like they're gonna break your heart. They're not gonna give you what you need. Or worst case, like if you're failing, you're out of, it's not just a job, you're out of a family. So it promotes this like very contradictory style where it's like, okay, we will love you and we will support you as long as you're perfect and you're doing exactly what I want, but also the standards might change a little bit. So it's kind of this very anxious feeling that you have. It's something we don't really talk about too much explicitly. So that's a piece of it.
Yeah, Herb Thompson, when I had him on the show, he mentioned something. He said, if you're the kind of person that has more than 3 stickers in the back window of your Ford F-150 that are all military, you are probably going to have a tougher time adjusting to the civilian world. If you, I'll just take our good friends down at the 82nd, for example. If you run around all day and your car's got jump wings on it, and your shirt's got jump wings on it, and you got jump wings tattooed on your arm, and you got a dog named Airborne, and you got a parakeet named Ranger, your attachment style might be very tightly identifying your own personal self-worth with the military, and have a slightly more challenging adjustment as you slide out into the civilian world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other component of that too is, everything that if you're tying yourself in your identity that closely to what you're achieving in the military, the other piece is like, there's never an end point. Mm-hmm. You don't hit a milestone where you're like, hell yeah, like I'm doing really good right now. Great. Like this is awesome. You're constantly thinking about the next mission, the next objective, the next promotion you need to get, because like, if you're not getting promoted and you're not continually increasing and like doing better, in theory, you'll get discharged eventually. You're not meeting the next rank, whatever. Like you have to continually progress. And that makes sense when you're thinking about the fact that like we're training for war, for combat, like our goal is to continuously be pushing so that in theory, like a war will be done. Mm-hmm. We're meeting this really massive objective that has an end goal. So all the training, all of the continuing to drive and push makes complete sense within the context of basically the singular aim that we have to be in the military. But the problem is when you get out, there's not an end goal, really. Like really what's the end goal? Like death? Like we're not fighting for a war once we get out of the military, but I talk to a lot of veterans who are just constantly thinking about like, okay, what's the next objective I need to reach? What's the next milestone I need to get to? And they're constantly like, okay, I started this. Now I need to go to like think about what I'm going to do next. And they're not allowing themselves the opportunity to like breathe and just sit back and kind of enjoy the process a little more, because they're so used to having this expectation on them from the attachment style that like, I need to constantly be performing and growing and moving and like pushing forward. But sometimes it's okay to like breathe and be like, okay, I'm doing pretty good right now. Like, and enjoy the journey a little bit more.
Yeah, it looks like Jeffrey Hartmeyer, who joined us here today, he gets it. They've got their ERB or their ORB in the back window. Yeah, absolutely. He knows what we're talking about. He's been there. So now that we got a piece of it, we understand where the stress is coming from. We understand the stress is coming, and you have to, if you want to have a healthy transition, whether you're going to school or you're going to employment, you probably need to face down this stress monster and address it, because it's coming whether you like it or not. You served in Iraq. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of our folks that are on here today have served. Anybody who's had to attend a counter IED class has heard that phrase of getting left of the boom, attacking the network, right? Not waiting for the event to occur, the catastrophic event to occur, to find a way to mitigate it, right? So since we acknowledge that stress is now normalized, right? That stress is occurring, that is a natural part of the transition, right? That it's got a lot to do with the way you think about your relationship with the military, how you identify your sense of self. How can we get left of this boom?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of what you said right there is a huge step, at least compared to out, is just recognizing this is a natural part of the process and is something that to one degree or another, everybody experiences. So just when that moment hits you, knowing that you're not alone, and it doesn't mean that you're a failure, that this is just part of the experience we're going through, and not beating yourself up too much over the fact that being immediately and you're going to, of course, like that, things go. Oh, your video went out. Can you still hear me, Lucas?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Well, you got a little choppy there for a second, but I think we've got you back.
Okay. Good. Okay, great. Yeah, so I think, recognizing it is normal and giving yourself the grace to say, like, it's okay that I don't have it all figured out right away. Like, that's part of the process, and it's a very iterative process. And I think also, we've talked a lot about how the military issues you your values, your goals, your identity, all of this stuff. So really taking that time even before you get out to think about, like, who am I outside of the uniform? What do I want to work towards? What type of life do I want? And why do I think I want the things that I want? And taking the time to reflect on that is key, and learning how to kind of embrace that process and be open with other people and kind of talk to them and seeking out resources, whether it's within the veteran community, but also outside of the veteran community, because that's the community that we're all going to. And so it's, okay, how can we find connections? How can we get support? How can we talk to others? And how can you kind of go on this journey of figuring out who the hell you are without a uniform and what looks like a good life for you? Because there's no right answer and there's no guidebook for it. And then,
and some people, Paul, shout outs to great resources here, and lots, way more resources out there than you think there are. Still serving vets, next up vets to PM, RecruitMilitary, my company, the one that I'm proud to work with, RecruitMilitary. There are folks, for those of you who are getting ready to get out, Emily nailed it. There are so many resources out there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be military. Some people, when they get out, they want to stay within the military bubble. Other people, they say, hey, I've had enough, I want to go do my own thing. But find your tribe, attach, identify yourself, and then look for that next goal in life, because it's out there. Just because you're not in the uniform anymore doesn't mean you're not still valuable as a person.
Yeah. And what you think you want to do before you get out, it's okay to change that. Like, I know I talk to a lot of veterans about that, where they think that, well, I decided I'm going to go on this path when I get out. And then because we're so taught to stay the course and continue pushing through, they feel guilty if they need to change. Like, I have changed my entire career path probably 6 different times in the last 7 years, so it's a lot of, once you get out, just almost using them as exploratory missions, thinking, okay, maybe I want to go do this. So you explore that for a little bit. If you have luxury to be like, okay, maybe that's not what I was thinking it was. And being willing to give yourself the permission to pivot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to tell yourself it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not have it all figured out. You don't need an op order and a Fraggo in your pocket. Sometimes you're just going to have to navigate this and find your own way through. Mm-hmm. And, with the personal courage and the tenacity and the work ethic that service members have, everybody who's about to get out, who's about to transition, you're going to get through this. It's going to be tough, and there is going to be stress. But I'll tell you, just from my foxhole, you're going to get there. You're going to get through it. It's going to be okay. And if you need help, reach out for it.
Yeah, and it's not linear. It's not linear.
Emily, I wish we could have you on for a whole nother hour, but we are time constrained. Folks out there, I'll tell you what, if you're not already following Emily on LinkedIn, I would highly suggest that you do. I have a feeling that when her research is done and her findings are published, they're going to be worth reading. Emily, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucas.
And for those of you who haven't already done so, there's a handy-dandy link going across the screen there. Feel free to hit us up. Do yourself a solid. Use the link rmvets.com/live. That'll take you to our website where you'll find over 400,000 job opportunities from more than 16,000 employers. And there's a great way to relieve stress is having a great job lined up for yourself when you get out of the uniform. More than 16,000 employers around the world, and around the corner, you'll also find a library of content, all designed to help veterans, transitioning service members, mil spouses, etc., find meaningful employment. On behalf of RecruitMilitary and the folks who joined us today, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Emily, for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Have a good day.
Thanks. And for those of you who enjoy the show on a recurring basis, be sure to tune into our next show, April 20th, when we hear from retired Lieutenant General Mary Legere. She'll be giving us a senior leader's perspective on transitioning from military service to civilian employment. You won't want to miss that. This has been Lucas Connolly for RecruitMilitary Live. Until next time, good luck and Godspeed.